We have no problems. We would like to make it lively. First, I would like to thank all speakers for the ideas and presentations. Fascinating world. And I'm wondering how we get the elderly generation, Professor Harada, to use all these nice devices which we will develop. In my environment, maybe I'm the oldest from you from this group. I found very often that there's one in the family who is handling the emails and the computers. And if something is wrong, nobody can do the repair work, but in the family there's a nephew or a son or somebody else, and there's also some hesitation of the old generation. And old starts with 40. It's not the age very often. It's a mentality. So how, if you look to Japan, how do you overcome? There should be a microphone, Professor Harada. If you can use one of the. Okay, so how can you handle that in Japan? How do you handle that in Japan? How do you educate the elderly people, or say they will someday be dead and not longer more in the roads?
Elderly people to educate the
For mobile telephones, for all these services which we might have. What are you doing?
Yeah, so in the experiment and the on-demand bus system, we had at the first time for the elderly that we use some of the internet-based reservation system, but it doesn't work. So we put some guard to hear the directory to telephone, and instead of the elderly, the young girl make the reservations. Yeah. Yeah. So okay. Such kind of helps may be necessary, I think.
Okay, so we had already some questions from the audience. So I would first ask Anne to read the first, maybe the question, and would like to have your answers.
Is this on? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Patrick Vogel asked a question about that I emphasized an observation from Professor Kenworthy, who also mentioned it yesterday, that there can be a decrease in traffic if you take roads away, suggesting that people adapt to the situation. And he wanted to know, do you have any insights for us? What would be the time frame for this adoption process from my experience? And what do we do to support it? Well, in the San Francisco Bay Area, we've had situations that have been catastrophic with earthquakes and lost major portions of our transportation network. And then we have had planned events, major construction that has closed down major segments of the Bay Bridge, as an example. We're rebuilding that at this point, and affects many travelers on a temporary basis. And then we've also had planned removal of highway systems. So we've had experience dealing with all three. I think what is fundamental to any planned decision to remove traffic lanes is basically to provide people full information about what their options will be. It is not something to be done on a cavalier basis just to remove it, but to say, in doing so, what are the benefits and what are your options to deal with the impact on traffic. An example is downtown San Francisco closed about 8 blocks in Lower Market Street, very, very busy downtown area, to open it up for pedestrian and bicycle access only. And everyone thought, well, that's going to be a real big problem because of the fact that we'd be displacing folks. But the fact of the matter was that there were many options for people to be able to move off of that system, and we just needed to do a very good job pre-warning people, but also providing real-time information about what those options are. So it is not as if it is magic that traffic will disappear, but there are some very good opportunities for warning people ahead of time and providing options. I would suggest that congestion pricing is going to have that same requirement, that we have options available. The revenues that are generated from pricing schemes need to be reinvested into options that are usable by those who will be affected. So that's a significant part of the work that we do. And then Robin asked me a question. That I said that California could only expand its road capacity infrastructure by 5%, and why is that? What I meant to say, if I didn't, was that the Bay Area is at that limit of 5%, and U.S. regulations basically require a very solid air quality conformity requirement for all of our long-range planning. For areas like the San Francisco Bay Area, where we already have a very fully built-out system, if you add capacity of the roadway network, you need to show that it will not have a detrimental effect on air quality. So if you are already at a point of having a fully built-out system, the possibility of you having a negative impact is quite high. Another issue for us is that having built out the system, we need to spend a lot more money on maintaining it, and far less is available for expanding the system itself. And that is why we emphasize quite a bit the system management over capacity increases, and that is the 5% rule for us right now, is that we basically have gotten down to less than 5% of our long-range planning funding is dedicated to roadway increases.
Okay, thank you. Robin, you got several questions, and I might add one from Mr. Huss from BMW. We have heard about car sharing models with different car models, but people want to have the same vehicle at the same time. Weekend, for example, cabriolet and other cars, the winter four-wheel drive. So normally then the provider needs a relatively huge car fleet, and who is paying that? So this is one additional question to you, and later on I would like to this question also Mr. Krishnak is answering.
There was a, wow, that's loud. Oh.
We can hear you very good.
I think, was it yesterday? I've just done 3 conferences in a row this week, but yes, yesterday, someone had said that they had, Larry said that he had done an analysis of car use across the week, and at any given point, the maximum number of cars used was 10% of all vehicles. So we could have 10% of the SUVs required, and we could satisfy all the people. What was interesting to me while I was doing Zipcar and seeing the data in real time is that I realized that we had an insight into people's car use that car manufacturers didn't have. Mm-hmm. And what we found was Saturdays at 1 p.m. was peak car use. And if we took away the commute times, which we know those spikes and people went in other methods, those are the 2 times of day when people don't have discretion around travel time. Almost everything else you do have discretion, which we like to ignore. But you know, when are you going to go food shopping? When are you going to go play tennis? I realize some things have very defined periods of time, but lots don't, so that enables that variability. And lastly, around that point, I was talking to someone today at the break. We give inadequate credit to individuals around their choice and constraints. One of the things that I think that we did at Zipcar, which was very successful, people used to ask me, did we optimize where the cars were, and did we optimize which vehicle to offer up to people? No, what we did instead was show people, here's a calendar of availability. You, in your own brain, knowing your own options, choose what works for you. So you might think, in a traditional system, booking system, you might say, I want a car Tuesday at 7:30 to 9:30. If you just get to ask that one question in a blind way, and you will get perhaps a no. But if you were shown the whole system, you would say, wow, if I took it 7:45 to 9:45, it's available. And I would make that change in my head without a blink. So we need to look actually at individuals optimizing. So do I need an SUV on every weekend of the year? No. Did I want it for that weekend? Perhaps I did, but wow, it's half the price if I take it the next weekend. I'll go next weekend. So people are able to optimize. My other questions, one is one that I had really meant to say during my talk, so I'm very happy that someone asked it, which is from Frank Ruff of Daimler. Do you think we need different vehicle concepts and designs for car sharing? Which features should be optimized? For me, the one piece that I know very clearly is that we need to, cars are built and manufactured today with the idea that it's one owner accessing one car. We absolutely need to separate car access and ignition disable from a key and from an owner. So every car sharing system in the world today has to put a box in every car. And that investment is varying amounts, but you have to install. It's an investment. What I really, really want you to be able to do is to be able to put the API up there so that we can get into the door open and ignition disable. And I realize it's not disabling while you're driving down the street. It's disabling when you come to a stop, you can't restart it. And those two things need to happen in order to let many people share a car. And that's a really, really important piece. So I'm asking you car manufacturers, please realize lots of different people want to access a car. And then a small piece as a parent and as having run many car sharing companies over the years is child seats. That is a big product that you have to carry with you. And what happens with car sharing today is when people have one child, they continue to use the system. When they have two, then they move to their own vehicle. And it's in part because of this requirement to carry this heavy, big, giant thing with you. And if car seats can just be folding down and back up, that's... So really, that is the only two things that I think needs to be changed. Other than that, I do not advocate one kind of car, as I said before. It's every kind of car should have those facilities. The other two questions are actually one question, which is what's the business model for car sharing and does it work, and what's the business model for bus car? Is car sharing profitable? Zipcar today is now a public company, so its records are open. And it proves itself to be just shy of profitability or maybe profitable in the last quarter. I think, having been the former CEO, I of course think it should have been profitable years ago. But it is, I believe that it can be a very profitable, it can be profitable. The big distinction between car ownership and car rental is the administration over top and the cost of parking. Individuals get to largely park their cars for free or at very low cost, whereas a company and an enterprise is having to pay market rates for this parking. So the parking policies of cities is an important piece that needs to be got at, and also when we're building these giant, large buildings, who gets access to that garage? Again, it's just like the cars. You want to let the public have access to garages so that they can use the cars. With respect to bus car, we charge a 15% commission on the cost of the rental, and we subtract from that insurance in addition. So I believe that peer-to-peer car sharing will be profitable more quickly than traditional car sharing because we don't carry those costs of ownership, depreciation, parking, and maintenance. That's borne by the user who's, as I say, getting cheaper parking rates and using his vehicle for other things.
Robin, in France, if you say that the owner is still the private person is doing the car sharing and he gets money. And in Germany, I would be sure that the German tax government would calculate that as an income and say, okay, we would like to have a taxation on that. Is that the case in France as well?
I think it's an issue in every country. And it's an issue also, it is every country. In the United States right now, if you make more than $600 by selling stuff through eBay, eBay is supposed to report it to the US government. In France, when I look at the laws, there's a gray area and it talks about whether this is income that you can count on and is reproducible versus one-offs. If I were talking to a government policy group, I would say you absolutely have to start looking at how you are going to tax and to do it fairly entrepreneurial endeavors, because it's not only in car sharing that it's happening, it's in bed sharing, it's in selling stuff on eBay, stuff on Etsy. It's a big I don't want to say it's a problem, it's a big opportunity, and I think we need to keep the levels down, and that I would not tax. So for car sharing, my pitch is until I'm making more than $6,000 a year or 6,000 euros a year, which is what it costs me to own and maintain a car, this is not a profit center.
Yeah.
You should encourage it because we want to have fewer cars and fewer parking spaces. Once my costs exceed my benefits, my profits exceed my costs, please start taxing me then. But until then, don't tax it.
But I think to start these programs, I think there should be also some governmental move to give more
make it
freedom.
overt.
Yeah, sure. To give more freedom to that because the amount which finally government gets is small in respect to the other problems with CO2 or with electricity, power plants, and so on.
Absolutely. So please
Well.
tell your government to do that. I agree.
Okay. A good transfer to Dr. Kopp. He got a lot of questions, so why don't you start to answer them?
Yes, thank you. One question that is on more than one card is, wouldn't it hit those with low incomes in particular if you start to charge for the external costs? And this is, of course, a very important question. In developing countries, there is a different distributional consequence than in rich countries, because it's the richer people who would have the charges on the individual cars and not the poorer ones. But it is not that there is an intention to make anybody poor. We also have to see what's going to happen with the fiscal revenues that such a policy would induce. It is not even that mobility is to be charged. What is to be charged is pollution and time losses. The intent is to signal to the users of means of transport the costs that they incur on others, and they cannot know about unless there are these charges. Whether this has income effects for any group depends on what governments do with the revenues. It is not at all clear that those who pay the charges will have a negative income effect. This is not important. What is important is to signal the external cost to those who use means of transport. The second question that I have is, isn't it cruel to the car industry, and isn't it that there will be bad employment effects? Also, this is not at all clear to me. Once there are these price signals, it will give direction to innovation of the industry producing cars and producing all kind of means of transportation. And it is not clear, I mean, the people in the room, they will have more employment rather than less. And it is not clear that the industry overall will have a loss of employment. And it is not clear at all that the industry overall will have a loss of profitability. In this country, there was strong resistance in the beginning against renewable energy, for example, and the German government has implemented a very strong program to increase the share of renewable energy, and this was associated with profit increases of the utility companies and not with profit losses against expectations they had in the beginning. So I would think that the change that follows from signaling the downside of transport to the users is something that can help the society, can help employment in the for the producers of the means of transportation, and can even increase profitability. A last question I have concerns the different attributes that we associate with having a car, and that this is far more than moving from point A to B with this or another means of transportation. And it concerns whether in smaller cars luxury is less valued.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, all of us, we like to have luxury features in our means of production. We even like to have them in transit systems of production. But it seems that the resistance against the loss of luxury features of transportation for those who were used to big and luxury cars is stronger than the aspiration of those who didn't have them to have them in new ones. This is what has been found out in the US market. But to say the attribute story is something that is not something confined to individual cars. I have visited Google, and they have a program of getting people to and from Mountain View, from San Francisco area with buses. And these buses look very different from the buses we are used to. And the bus stations look very different from the bus stations we are used to. They are air conditioned, there's drink and food, and you can connect at all times to the internet in the buses of Google. And this is what it is about. If there is a policy to signal the downside, the health costs, the enormous health costs of fossil fuel emissions to the users of transport systems, the safety risks, and the time losses of congestion, then changes will happen. That does not necessarily mean that mobility is wiped out. It is very unlikely that mobility is wiped out, but changes will happen that make mobility without emissions more pleasant.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor Lindau, there were two questions to you, or one?
Just one.
Yeah. There comes very soon another one.
Oh, I see. The one I saw was...
No, let's answer first the first
Okay,
one.
I don't have the car, but I remind Robin asked about the size of the width of the corridor, the Green Line in Curitiba. And in fact, it was a previous roadway, so it has quite a large availability of space. And in fact, what will be introduced in the center is a linear park. So it will be a linear park. Oh, okay. Well, it's it might be well the case. Then we have to see the sort of developments that will be done there. Usually, I mean, in the other corridors, is not that much commerce that is installed along. And I think this will be mainly residential in many aspects, and probably only in centralities we'll have more commerce there. But the idea is to have a park in the middle.
Yeah, there is a question from Detlef Frank, former BMW, and he's also was member of the VDI Council, to Professor Lindau and to Anne. Why do you only pick on cars and push for car sharing and disregard the potential of bedroom sharing and kitchen sharing in buildings that saves 20% of building space and 30% of installation costs and helps to increase the wanted density in built-up areas? It's also a good question for you. So, the offices normally are only used from 8 in the morning until, let's say, 7 p.m. at night. Why don't you say, here, it's ready to have a shared hotel, so we would not stay here at night, we would go over there and have a sofa or a bed there and a shower. So why don't, was that your question, Mr. Frank? Where is he? Yes, sir. Okay, so why don't you expand this model? And I have also a question, Robin, to you. I'm now 70, but I think when I married and had my own family, I would not be so happy if I would have a bed sharing situation in my home, you know. Before, when I was a student, I was relatively more open. Is that also a question of age? So who starts? Maybe Robin, you?
To your question or desire of flexibility across your life, a good friend of mine in Massachusetts pointed out that we have zoned cities and apartments in such a way that his own children couldn't live where he lives, and when he gets old, he's going to have this giant big house that's empty and he won't be able to sell it to anyone. So I look at the kitchen sharing or my dishwasher sharing, and I'd say my clothes washer. If you think we used to share those things all the time, then we thought I need to have 100% access. I'm not willing to do it. I think that there is a huge opportunity for sharing and that we need to incorporate this flexibility, and right now it's zoned out. That we talk about the ability for low-income earners to live in cities. They can't live in cities because we said minimum household size is this, bedrooms have to look like this, the kitchen has to look like that, the staircase has to look like that. So now it's become a very expensive proposition. It's illegal in most of these cities to have rooming houses. For years and years, people used to live in rooming houses and share kitchens and bathrooms. Now that's illegal. We need to go back to a time where we can have a choice. And maybe you rent out the room when you're a college student, and then you have 3 children and say, I'm not renting my rooms out anymore, and then you become living by yourself when you're 85, and people can live in it again.
Directly?
Just wanted to comment on this point. The other way is maybe for the industry not to be defensive about peer-to-peer economics, but embrace it. So in the UK, BMW are a very big supporter of rentmyparkingspace.com, which actually is a peer-to-peer making use of an existing space, and of course benefits to the car industry from people using peer-to-peer in that way. Now, I'm not sure about the overall environmental pros and cons of that, but clearly there are intelligent ways that the industry can harness peer-to-peer economics and make a benefit.
Would you comment, Professor Linda, on that question? Maybe Brazil is totally different.
I think the question of sharing, it comes a lot with equality, and we are in a very unequal society. So I doubt that we would be prepared at this moment, I mean, for those that know Brazil, to share everything. I mean, this is not within our culture. For instance, coming to the car sharing thing, and I was going to ask about that, if I were to put my car into a pool of cars to be shared, I would at least cost me $1,000 more per year in insurance, because we insure cars. We don't insure people, see. I know that in some societies you insure people, but whatever, I mean, it has many different things to, and I wouldn't be that sure that it would apply everywhere. I mean, we have societies, different levels, and even us at Embark, I mean, we cannot just transfer solutions from one country to another, we have to adapt it, and so.
And is it a
Well,
way for California?
I think what we're challenged by really is thinking very differently about how we use space. In what my presentation and others is around available transportation systems. And housing is a big piece of that. And I think Robin is right that the current regulations that preclude us from using that space as effectively as possible is something we have to directly deal with. We probably have more opportunity with the transportation network because of the regulation related to that is less impactful, I would say, to the individual than housing or some other more personal service that is being suggested. The point about whether we would share office space and the like and amenities related to that, I think is also a very important one. We have an interesting example going on in the Bay Area where the opportunity exists for a new campus for one of our major businesses, and they chose to locate it probably as far away from the transit system as they could, because in my mind anyway, they want to have their own transportation network to keep their employees very focused on what they do for that business. So we have a lot of cultural inertia that I think we will have to overcome, and it's not just the housing and the individual, but it's also the corporate side of the picture.
Yeah, I think, but we are on the move. And my kids very often drive to the UK in Cornwall, and their preferred place to stay is bed and breakfast, and it's and normally the people who are hiring or selling that for 1 or 2 nights are very nice, and it is like a family visit. So maybe the move will not be so quick, but there are chances, and I think the model in France we were discussing on car sharing. That seems for me a model which really might work, because there's somebody who's always watching that the car is in a good shape, because it's there is some responsibility to people, and I think without responsibility and control, our democracy will not work very often in a lot of countries. We have a general question to all of us from I can't read the name, but I hope I can read the question. The question is, the dislocation created by development of personal mobility services presents a huge risk for political leaders. How can our political leaders be persuaded to make the necessary choices for this change? Insofar, if we really change companies, structures, peoples, and we know how complicated it is already to close a factory in one area, also from a political sign, and I think the decision in Germany go away from the nuclear power plants, that definitely means for some period more coal-driven power plants means more CO2. So there's no, we cannot just live from wind and solar energy because we have not the necessary devices to make the storage very efficient. So who has comments on that? Is the politics a resistant possibility, or are they the resistant people, or are we the resistance?
Just a small comment, something that I had read that struck me was that in the US we have a strong push for home ownership over rental, and that means that people's job potential is more sticky. So when an economy is going really poorly, it's much harder for them to move to another location where there are jobs. And it really struck me what a trade-off that is, and that the US should be less pushing towards home ownership and going back towards rentability, because as we're in this very high transition future, we need to induce flexibility in many, many ways.
Look, of course there'll be dislocation as we go through these major changes, but we have to remember that there'll be even worse dislocation if we don't. And we think about the impacts of climate change. You think about 9.5 billion people and food availability, what's already happening to food price spikes. And you know, our MI5, our Secret Service, say that we're 3 meals away from anarchy, you know, in the sense that if people don't get food, then what happens to society? So I think, yes, there'll be dislocations, but the alternative to not managing and moving in these directions, for me, are much scarier.
Next question is a very serious one. I can say that from our own experience. That is a question from Don Hancock, former GM and FISITA past president, to all of us. General discussion on the reliability and security of our cybernet world. What are countermeasures? We just have experienced in the city of Berlin a new hobby of thefts on BMWs, Volkswagen, Audis, and Mercedes. There, the hobby is to take out the navigation, the fixed installed navigation system. That is not unusual. But what is new is that this professional now are ready to know the software. So they have access to the software. So they can, normally if you take out this navigation system, it doesn't work if you don't have the correct software, but they were able to have the codes, and they are able to change the the numbers of the devices. And if you are lucky, you can buy on the eBay, you can buy your own navigation system back for half of the price you would have to pay as a spare part. That is not a safety and security item yet, but if we move, for example, to the access by mobile phone with this capacity, they might be able to get access also to this type of cars and take the cars away, change it. So I once was guessed by the people in London, of your police people, experts on car theft and what the people are doing with that. And and I was shocked when they did show me the videos about our Volkswagen and Audi cars, how professional their training material is, and with internet and everything now it's much more easier. So what are we doing? Who has an answer?
I may comment. I may
Yeah.
comment on that. By the way, we just had an incident in the very same hotel we're staying here a couple of weeks ago with a colleague of mine, where they opened up the car, took his laptop out, and nobody ever saw anything on the car. So there was no real proof that something happened. The point for me is we should see the technology, and I'm not saying that because I'm a part of a technology company, but I'm in a technology culture, to improve these kind of security measures. We've heard about near-field communications, for instance, and all the things about the box you want in your car to have make car sharing possible. I think these are also opportunities to go away from the common sense that a little key, is more secure than a mobile device or something like that. I think that's an emotional thing. In the end, it's the other way around. If you use the right parts of electronic, the rights of security measures, also to connect something to a wider spread internet. Only 5% of the cars quite now are connected to the internet. This will increase dramatically, as you all know. So if you use this technology together with near-field communication, together with clear security policies, and also with a kind of common-based part, a common-based decision, what parts of the car industry model will be open to other technologies, and which one will be the closed box for security measures, I think that's something that's feasible. That's nothing really special. The point is you have it in much more secure devices. You have it on the internet. You have with computers today, where the encryption and security is much higher with a car. You need to bring this kind of technology into the car, and then you, I think, would profit from that one.
And I think it will be a permanent competition between the hackers and between the system makers. Always a large competition.
Yeah, but you talk about the kind of individual security, but what about the security of the whole system, I think was behind that question. And systems get hacked, systems crash. Those of you who are BlackBerry users remember 3 or 4 weeks ago when everyone's relying on BlackBerry, the global system went down. It was terrible. You had to pay attention for a whole meeting. But seriously, these things do happen. And if the whole system is reliant on this architecture, what happens when that gets hacked or that crashes?
Just the last comment. I think that's the point about going away from central architectures to peer-to-peer architectures, also in this way. That's the thing about BlackBerry, was one central architecture worldwide that failed. This is something I think we cannot allow ourselves. It's the same thing with how we do interact. It's more peer-to-peer, and we need an architecture that's really establishing these kind of concepts as well.
There were two further questions to all of us. One was how much we think the percentage of car sharing could be. You told, what was it in the United States, 1.5 or 0.5, or you mentioned a number. So it's for sure different from country to country. Let's not talk about the countries where they just now start to get cars, like India and China and Russia. But let's take North America and Central Europe.
If we are going to juxtapose car sharing from car ownership, I can tell you that if you need a car to get to work, you will own a car, period. So we can say what percent of the population in any individual country doesn't need a car to get to work today. That percent can and should be car sharing.
Okay.
And in as much as we can get more people to get to work without cars, that will also induce the higher possibility of car sharing. But for me, that's the only number one criteria as to who could be doing it.
Yes, to add to this, to me it's a very interesting question on how to increase the share of car sharing in the context of developing countries. I mean, at the face of it, you would expect that when people struggle to get hold of their first car, they should benefit most from the savings potential that car sharing offers. And it is striking to see that nothing of this is developing endogenously, and it's a question of what one could do to help these developments, particularly in these contexts where people, for reasons of low incomes, should have an interest in joining car sharing systems.
There are some reasons. Yeah.
So in answer to that, I feel like we have set up many, many structures that prevent car sharing facility. So one is if I'm low income in a developing country, the likelihood of people around me knowing how to drive, A, there's low car license and permitting. B, the whole insurance industry around low income drivers is also really difficult. I was told in Brazil that those of the lowest income, which is not the lowest income, those lowest income who can afford cars, they drive without insurance because car theft is so incredibly high that the insurance prices are high, so they're driving without insurance. So I'd say, and then I would say the cost of key exchange, that's another big problem. So these are things that make my ability and willingness to share my own car something hard. I think those people would be willing to share and rent out their own car if it could be insured when they did that, if they knew the person was going to be a good, could count on the person being a good driver. So it comes to these fundamental infrastructure pieces that have to get done.
The last question, which we could comment all in all of us. If you look to around the world, you find very different solutions. When we discussed last year, we talked about safety, a little bit about security as well, safety on roads and cars and pedestrian and trucks and buses. And we were very pleased that the Chinese, which had dramatic bad figures until a few years ago, have started a program. They are now most aggressive on NCAP, this consumer testing for safety. They have installed accident investigation teams on the roads. They are very active to hire Europe and American and Japan experts to give lectures at the universities on road and vehicle safety. And they take it as a nation, this part, serious. So how could we enforce? That's a good examples to deal. We will not have all very soon. California will not. That for me, San Francisco is a mega city in a big area. I would say there will not be a new New York or Shanghai or something like that in this area. But how can we enforce it? The good examples are installed much more quicker or even known, or that the people are willing to do something like this. Person from Bremen yesterday was enthusiastic about his program. So how could we move? What could we do? Should we just have another conference in 3 years and say, okay, now Sao Paulo has this wonderful one green line and nothing else. So how could we speed up? So who could comment on that? And Robin, ladies first.
I'm just noting two things. One, that you've made me think about when I said what was interesting to have in cars is bump detection. So that's the other reason when I lend out my car, I want to know if there was a big smack, so then when it encourages me to go look, and I know as a driver that that's being reported. So that would be the other piece. So if we think of how do we encourage more of this in the future, one is for governments to encourage car sharing, which is what is their parking policy? What kind of parking garages get to be built, and do they encourage and enable for shared use of parking spaces and appropriately priced parking spaces? The others for you car manufacturers to start thinking about those things I said about changing how access to cars, thinking what do we need to do if there's a multiple users of the car. And I have to say I was hugely amused by the putting the right radio station in the car seat direction. When people are sharing cars, typically, if you think about you personally, you live in a neighborhood and you use 2 or 3 cars that are the closest to you, and you like driving the same car, and you know that same car. And getting into the car and adjusting the car seat, I have to say I do because my husband is very tall and I'm not so tall, and it's nothing. So those aren't things I think we need to be focused on for shared cars. It's these other much bigger things. And the last, we haven't talked about this because this isn't the right forum, but if I think about grand cultural change, I want to see more movie producers having love stories that happen with bicycles and on subways and not with the fast cars. And I think that will be a huge game changer.
Okay, and
I think your question had to do with how do we accelerate
yeah,
innovation as well in more developing countries, I guess
Yeah,
is the way
yeah.
to note that. No, I think what we need to be really clear about is that there are institutional and cultural differences, that the transition from what we can learn through demonstrations or deployments in the US would be very differently treated in other places with different government regulations and the like. So the technology, I think, is more easily transferable in terms of these kinds of conferences and discussions, but we need to put it in the context of what is institutionally capable to be done, so we don't set an expectation that things are so easily transferable and then there's disappointment when they aren't. We were called upon by the Chinese government several times during the development of their plans for the Beijing Olympics to deal with what was your traveler information system and how did you handle any assortment of transportation issues. They had the ability immediately to put some of those things in place because there was a big event, it was a world stage, and they had the regulatory ability to do that. If we had reversed that and tried to implement a number of those ideas and import them into the US, we would be immediately confronted by regulation. And so I think in simultaneous effort in dealing with technological improvements or service improvements and design is we need to have an eye to what is possible from the institutional barriers. And that is no small matter, and one that I think that we need to address as much as we're dealing here with automotive issues and technologies. What are the institutional contexts?
I think the workshops this afternoon might give an opportunity, like we did it on the safety area, to define recommendations, and then we should use your organization and also your capability to feed this back on a more international basis, where you have the opportunity. It's a commission in Brussels and in Washington and in Japan and in China and where we're in India, in Brazil, where we are working, and I think that is a good chance. I have to announce that the workshop 1 is not on this floor. That's one floor up. But the other 2 workshops, the rooms are in this area. I thank again, it was a marvelous presenter this morning. You were so good on the timing, which I have a record on that, and I thank also the audience for the participation. And now it's time for lunch, and we can continue with our discussion. Thank you very much.